Hello, welcome back to another episode of I Captain of My Ship. Today I like to talk, I like to tell my story about what happened a few years after the event with the US police officer. What happened? I will tell you in a minute. Before I start my story, I first like to remind you of the information workshop I will give about how to give space for emotions and also limits to behavior with children when you raise them. It can be a challenge, and I like to help you on some information in an introduction workshop. So if you'd like to know more, please see the description below. And now I like to tell my story. It was the year winter 2021. It was in the middle of COVID. In the Netherlands, there were many restrictions. One of them, not allowed to have too many people in the house. The neighbors could call the police if someone would have more people that were not allowed. And it was in this, for me personally, not a nice time, that I was living in a business park with my two daughters still living at home. And I was renting the second and third floor for myself and my two daughters. And the first floor was rented by another single woman. And we were living in a business park, so there were no direct neighbors. So this was the situation. It was dark outside. It was about 8:30 p.m. and I was doing some things in the house. I can't remember what. I was just home, and my two daughters were home, and all of a sudden the doorbell rang. And I have a doorbell with a video in it, so I can always check who is at the door before I go downstairs, because sometimes they call and they need to go to my neighbors because they're at the wrong address. They call the wrong phone. They call at the wrong number. So, and then I can talk to them and tell them that they need to go somewhere else. So this time I was looking at my screen, and I was like, huh? What? Police officer at my door? And I immediately started to panic. And my thought was like, I'm gonna die, it's gonna happen. And I was just in a panic mode. So I ran upstairs to my daughter's, policeman up front, and I don't want to die. I was just in a panic mode. I was unbelievable panicking at that moment. And my two daughters just said, Mom, just act normal and open the door. And I could not, because I was just panicking too much. I really could not open the door at that moment. I was just far away with my mind. I was just totally panicking, and I could not open the door. So then my daughter thought, okay, I'll go downstairs. But when they were moving to the house, go downstairs, then the police officers that wanted to open the door immediately, they started to kick the door with their feet, making a lot of noise. I want to enter now. And they started to bang with their fists on the windows of my neighbor below. So it was all that noise that I started to panic even more. So it was not helping me. It was not also helping my daughters. I was like, oh, keep the door closed. That's better and more safe for us. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what the police officer want or they're doing, but we will not open the door anymore. And also my neighbor below, she didn't want to open the door for the policeman. She was, thank goodness, thinking of calling the owner of the apartment. So she called the owner and explained the situation. There's police officers at the door, and they probably need to go upstairs at the other neighbor above me, but I don't know what's going on because they're kind of aggressive. And she did not want to open the door, and I was not opening the door, so we don't know what to do now. And then thank goodness the owner knew some policemen, so he could just direct call them and ask what was going on, and they could explain to him that they thought that there was a party going on. So that's why when he called me and asked, "Are you having a party?" I said, "No, I'm not having a party." But they tell that they are hearing music. I said, "Well, my daughter is listening to music." And then he was calling the neighbor, of course, downstairs. Do you hear music? And she said, "I don't even know that they're listening to music. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't hear any music." And it was, you could hear everything that you were doing. So that if she cannot hear that we were listening to music, it was kind of strange that the police officer could hear the music outside the house. And so then I started to look around and I could see that, yes, my daughter was listening to music, but with her window open. So when you open the window and you pass the house, yes, then you can hear music coming from the third floor. Of course, I could see that, but there was no party. So I don't know, there's no party going on. So yeah, can you please tell it to them? So the police officer already left, and the owner called the police officer and told the whole story. There's nothing going on. You see more bikes in front of the house, but it's because the both daughters, we have more bikes. They have at least 2 bikes, so that we have more bikes than 1. So I'm sorry, but that's the case, and it has not changed. So that was, so they did not come back to my door because he could tell them, and he could also check everything around my house because there was video cameras all hanging around my house. So he could check everything that I was saying, if it was true, yes or no. So he checked everything and it was fine. There was nothing going on. There's nothing wrong. So the police officer didn't come to my house anymore. But I knew that I could not, I had to do something on my own behavior. As captain of my ship, I believe in, I don't believe in blaming others for my behavior. I can say, well, the police officer were misbehaving. I think they were. But I cannot change them. What I can change is my own behavior. So as captain of my ship, I started to look at myself. And I used this to evaluate myself, what was actually going on, what happened, and what could I change, how can I change the result, what kind of impact can I have on another result the next time. So the circumstances were, there were just 2 police officers at my door. And my thought was panic, danger. And I thought, how did I have these thoughts? Where do they come from? And then I remembered the event with the US police officer screaming and yelling at me, and me not knowing what I ever did wrong. And the whole situation you can find back. If you want to know the whole situation, of course, go back to the US police officer story, the previous story I told. Okay, so that thought, but that produced, of course, feelings of unsafety. And that feeling of unsafety, because my thought went back to the 2018 police officer event, that generated my action, that I was panicking, and that was the result. I did not open the door and they misbehaved, which is never a good thing to do, I think, as professional. But what can I do to generate other results? Well, first of all, of course, I had to go through the event with the US police officer. I had to accept that what happened, and that was not a story. And then after I had gone through that situation, I could go back and see myself, circumstance, police officer at the door. My thought can be, a helpful thought of me could be be curious. What's going on? What do you want to know? What did I miss? What's to have a curious, open mind. And that would give me a different feeling of open-minded, like, okay, what's going on? What did I miss? Something, you never know. I'm human. You never know what's going on. And then I could have explained to them, well, my daughter's listening to music. Yes, it's with an open window. And yes, the bikes that are standing in front of our house are our own bikes. So then I could have explained it all. That would give different action of me explaining and a different result, of course. So I used this model to have a totally different result the next time, 2023. It was my first episode about police officer when I went from Almere office to my home in Hilversum, and I was stopped by a police officer. And yes, I felt anxious. I felt that there were some things in my body going on, like, okay, there's police officer, but I was able to just have an open mind and just be open and listen to what they had to say. So I was proud of myself that I worked on it, overcame it, and now that so I could just talk to them and explain what happened, and we could just have a normal talk. So that's what I did. But why am I telling this story when you can compare police officers also with parents raising children, trying to keep the law, and of course, we all do. Also, me as a parent, we all have our emotions, and sometimes I just sometimes lost myself with when I was raising my children. Of course, sometimes I was angry, and I had just lost myself in anger, which is never a good idea, but it just happens sometimes. And I'm not a perfect parent, like you're probably not a perfect parent, and I personally don't believe there is a perfect parent on this earth. We all have our struggles, we all have our things to overcome, we all have our things going on in our lives, and we're all human. We all have our emotions. We have to deal with all emotions possible. And how do you deal with that as a parent? Well, what I did in my situation when I was dealing with my children when they were still living at home, and I lost myself in anger. What I started to do is going towards my children, to the child that I was losing my temper. And I would tell this child, I'm so sorry that I lost my anger. It was not my intention of becoming this anger, but this happened. And we started to talk about the situation, what happened, and also happened with me. Maybe I had a bad night, a bad sleep. Maybe one of the children woke me up with a nightmare, so that made me sleep less, or there was something going on at my work or something else. There's just things going on in my adult life that that did not help me to be able to react in a certain way. So I'm sorry for misbehaving. And what I started to see, that when I started to apologize to my children, then when they misbehaved, and they were children, and they sometimes screamed and yelled at me, which was not a good case, they would all, and I would stop them and send them to the room. You're not, of course, you cannot yell at your parent. And then they would always come back and say, I'm sorry, I was not supposed to yell. And they would explain to me, we could have a conversation about what was going on in the child's life and what triggered him or her. And we could have a conversation about that. And so apologize helps your child. Here, we all have our circumstances, and they're different every time. And our children are different. No child is the same. No parent is the same. Every circumstance is different. So, but our thoughts, we can influence our thought. What happens when you start to say, I'm sorry to your child. The thought of your child, that first thought that I did something wrong, my parents don't love me, they yell at me or whatever, then you can go back and say, I'm sorry. And the child can say, oh, my parent is a human. And they can start to understand what's going on and they can change their thought there. And yes, so we can have an influence in that. So I know it's hard sometimes, but it's worth having a talk about what's going on with your children. It's not always easy, but it's worth having a conversation about what things that's going on and what triggers you. And yes, let's go through the model and apologize if you misbehave. We all do. And say sorry. It's hard sometimes, but it's worth it. And I al- I found it more worth when I found out that also my children were copying my behavior. They would come to me and say, I'm sorry. I was like, what? So you get back what you give. So that was surprising and I thought worth sharing. And I just hope that you can, um, yeah, you are triggered to know more about how to deal with the emotions of your children when they're angry or sad or something going on with your child's life. So there is a workshop coming, as an information workshop, how, and I will tell you how you can tell your child how to deal with it. And I hope to see you there. More information below at the description. That's it for today. Bye bye. See you next episode.